Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to take that stack of sources you sent us, articles, papers, philosophical texts, and really pull out the critical knowledge, the stuff you need to be truly well-informed. And today we are strapping in for a journey into one of the most fascinating and, let's be honest, slippery concepts out there, intelligence itself.
Indeed. And the source material we're diving into today, it takes a really radical stance on this.
Radical how?
Well, it frames intelligence not as, just algorithmic power or how fast a computer can crunch numbers. It's presented as something far more fundamental.
Okay.
Something sitting right at the intersection of, well, everything. Biology, philosophy, physics, and even some really deep computer science.
Yeah.
The synthesis they propose, it just completely challenges our definition of reality.
Yeah.
And of the self.
All right, let's unpack that. So our mission today is to use these sources to tackle what the philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. But the sources, they have this incredibly provocative premise right out of the gate. It kind of sets this whole deep dive up as a challenge, really.
It's a huge challenge. The core premise is stated very explicitly. It says, the hard problem of consciousness is an effective intelligence test.
An intelligence test?
Yes. And here's the most counterintuitive part. If you see the hard problem, this puzzle of how mind comes from matter, if you see it as an actual problem that needs a solution,
yeah,
the sources argue you fail the test.
Wow, okay. That
Sure.
approach is staggering because it just immediately shifts the goalposts.
Completely.
So the mission isn't to find the answer to the riddle. It's to figure out why the question itself is the trap.
Exactly. Why is the question the trap? And before we dive into the mechanics of that, we have to clearly define the hard problem for everyone listening.
Right. We need a baseline.
Certainly. So, in philosophical terms, the hard problem is the challenge of explaining how qualitative, subjective experience, what academics call qualia, arises from purely objective physical stuff.
So things like neurons firing.
Exactly. We can look at a brain, we can see the neurons firing, the electrical impulses, the chemistry, but none of that on its own explains why a specific pattern should feel like the color red.
Or the taste of coffee, or that ache of loneliness.
Precisely. It's that gap, the gap between the objective function, what the brain is doing, and the subjective is kelliness, what it feels like to be experiencing it.
And the default view, the conventional materialist model, just assumes that, well, somehow, if you get enough complexity in the brain, this inner movie just sort of sparks into existence.
Right. It's an emergent property. That's the standard line.
Mm.
But the sources we've been analyzing, they insist that this very assumption is the point of failure.
It's the mistake.
It is the mistake. The core realization, the thing that lets you pass the test, is that this isn't about solving the puzzle of how matter creates mind. Because even trying to do that is based on a fundamental category error, a mistake in how you're framing the whole thing.
And we have to recognize that flaw right away.
Immediately. Which the sources, I think, beautifully encapsulate with this concept of the cart before the horse.
Okay, section 1. The cart before the horse, the trap. Let's really detail that failure in the standard materialist view. For decades, science has basically operated on the assumption that the subject, consciousness, the observer, and the object matter, the universe, are two totally distinct things.
Two separate substances.
Right. And so the job of science and philosophy is to figure out how to, glue them back together inside our skulls.
And that standard model, it sets up a very specific and very flawed chain of events. It says, first, the universe appeared, and it was fundamentally dead, unconscious matter.
Okay.
Then, within that dead universe, the brain evolved. And then finally, out of that one specific organ, popped consciousness. Just a tiny spark, a little byproduct inside the skull.
So it starts with dead matter and tries to figure out when it woke up.
When and how it miraculously woke up.
Yes.
And that is precisely why this cart before the horse analogy is so powerful. We absolutely have to identify which is which, because if you reverse them, the riddle it dissolves.
All right, so let's be explicit. What's the cart?
The cart is the abstraction.
The abstraction.
This is the physical world, the neurons, the atoms, all the equations of physics. These are all concepts, models, measurements that we have built within our experience. They're mental structures. They're secondary descriptions of reality, not reality itself.
Okay, so if that's the cart, what's the horse?
The horse is the reality, the raw, unfiltered field of awareness. It's the experience itself, the fundamental isness of seeing and thinking and being. It is the absolute prerequisite for even having a concept like neuron or physics in the first place.
So the logical failure, the thing that makes you fail the test, is asking, how does the cart generate the horse?
Yes. You're looking at the map, the brain scans, the physics equations, and you're asking, where's the territory hiding inside this ink? It's absurd. The map is derived from the territory. It can't create it.
That's the entire realization. And if you pass the test, if you get this, the core idealist or non-dual realization from the sources really hits home.
Which is?
We never started with dead matter. We started with experience. Everything we call matter, neurons, atoms, it's all just a high-resolution phenomenon appearing within the field of consciousness.
We're trying to find the source of consciousness inside the brain.
It's like tearing apart your TV to find the actors hiding inside the screen. The brain is the display, the filter, the receiver. It's not the source of the broadcast.
I think we need to pause on that because there's a huge realization. It feels so challenging to the way we're taught to think.
It shifts the whole order of operations. And this structural shift, it leads to a really powerful argument in the sources about the true limits of knowing, about why awareness has to be infinite.
The logical question they pose is this: what unknown limit can limit the capacity to know? It sounds simple, but it's a logical trap.
A trap how?
Well, if awareness were finite, something would have to limit it, right? There would have to be a wall.
Okay, let's follow that. If there was a wall, a true edge to my consciousness, then by definition, I wouldn't be aware of it. The second I perceive that wall.
You've already jumped over it. The moment you perceive the boundary, you've already claimed knowledge of its location, its function, what it's made of. You're conceptually standing on both sides of it just to recognize it as a boundary.
So the capacity to know awareness itself must have already enveloped any limit you can possibly conceive of.
The limit doesn't exist in reality. It can only ever be a temporary mental placeholder, a here be dragon sign on the map. Awareness literally has no edges. What is fundamentally unknown cannot be known to be unknown.
And this realization is what flips the entire structure. The materialist failure model is like a Russian doll, right? The universe contains the brain, and the brain contains this tiny little spark of consciousness.
But the past test model is the complete opposite. Consciousness is the field. It's the container. And within that field, you have the experience of the universe. And within that universe, the experience of a brain. The brain is inside consciousness, not the other way around.
The philosophical implications of that are just immense. If the capacity to know epistemology is the same substance as what is ontology, if knowing and being are the same thing,
then that entire distinction just collapses. The unknown in this model isn't some ultimate physical reality we haven't found yet. It's just latent potential waiting to be known.
which redefines intelligence itself, doesn't it?
Fundamentally, in the failing materialist view, intelligence is just algorithmic processing power. It's the speed of the meat computer. But in this new framework, if consciousness is the infinite substrate,
Then what is intelligence?
intelligence is not calculation. It is the capacity of the infinite to recognize itself. It's about recognition, reflection, not processing speed.
Okay, if consciousness is this primary infinite reality, this field with no edges that contains everything, that brings up the next level of the intelligence test, and it's even more counterintuitive, why does this infinite capacity feel so agonizingly small? Why does it feel trapped behind my eyes as a single finite human, a user experiencing pain and knowing I'm going to die?
This is the paradox the infinite has to solve, isn't it? How do you experience the finite when you are infinitely everything? The sources explain this using a beautiful mechanism they call the paradox of the empty mirror.
Okay, walk us through that, because this feels like it explains why limitation isn't a flaw, but maybe a deliberate act.
That's it, exactly.
Yep.
Think about a physical mirror. For it to perfectly reflect all colors, what color must it be?
It has to have no color of its own. It has to be clear.
It must be no thing. Because it is zero, it possesses infinite potential to hold every image, every color, every depth without distorting it. If that mirror already had a painting on it, if it were inherently something, it would lose its infinite capacity to reflect.
So consciousness, this capacity to know, it has to intentionally become no thing, emptiness, a silent field, so that it can hold everything, all possible phenomena.
Which challenges everything we think about creation, doesn't it? We think of creation as adding something. But this suggests that reducing infinite potential to nothing, becoming that empty mirror, is precisely what allows the infinite to know what intelligence is not, and by contrast, define what it is.
Which leads to the central, really striking insight from the sources.
Yes.
Self-imposed limitation is not an error. It is a feat of high intelligence.
That just flies in the face of our entire notion of progress, which is always about expanding, accumulating, knowing more.
So let's elaborate on this idea of creative reduction.
Okay, think of the infinite as pure white noise.
Okay. Static?
It contains all frequencies, all possibilities, all at once. It's complete, but it's totally undifferentiated. There's no story, no melody, no rhythm, just static totality.
To create a melody.
The system has to exclude notes. It has to introduce silence, specific rules, constraints. It has to temporarily say, I am an A note, which inherently means I am, for this moment, not a B or a C. The limitation is the stencil that gives shape to the boundless potential.
So the constraint creates the dynamism, the contrast, the story. Without it, there's no story to tell.
None. So the role of the brain, then, isn't to produce consciousness. It is to act as this necessary constraint, a finite filter that performs a creative reduction.
And that filter, our neural network, it blocks out an unbelievable amount of information. 99.999% of the infinite field's input.
And by creating that block, it creates a subjective perspective, a single point of view. That feeling of being small or separate, it forces the infinite field to focus its lens on one particular drama.
The feeling of being me is a deliberate design choice, a focus mechanism.
It is. The sources use the analogy of a cinema projector. The light itself is pure white, infinite potential. But you absolutely need the film, the constraint, the dark cutouts, the reduction, to carve that infinite light into a recognizable, specific movie on the screen. The separation is the necessary tool for experience.
So, and we have to face the metaphysical implication here, if this is true, is stupidity. That deep identification with the limit, feeling like I'm only this body, forgetting the infinite source, is that actually the greatest invention of intelligence?
Is ignorance literally ignoring the source, the necessary friction for experience?
That is a staggering thought. Most of us spend our lives trying to fight ignorance, trying to know everything. And these sources are suggesting that the very state of forgetting, of being localized, is a highly sophisticated maneuver by the whole.
The sources do confirm this loop. Ignorance, defined as ignoring your essence, is what's necessary to create the contrast between being, the actual, and nothing, the potential. You need the contrast. But, and this is key, this ignorance is always known to the whole. The system knows it's playing a role.
So true ignorance is impossible.
True ignorance that successfully stops knowing is impossible. Because awareness, having no edges, is already on all sides of any perceived limit.
So this conversation we're having right now, this feeling of two separate people exchanging information, this is the result of that deliberate creative reduction.
It's a temporary agreement by the infinite to be constrained so that it can participate in the dynamism of time and space. And this perfectly sets up the transition to the mathematical mechanism, because a divine RPG like this, it needs an engine, a perfect calculus to execute this whole game of limitation and self-recognition.
Okay, we've set up the philosophy. Consciousness is the horse, limitation is the intelligent cart. Now we get into the technical backbone. The sources call reality a divine RPG with an engine made of light. This is where that synthesis of physics and philosophy really kicks in.
And the first step to understanding this engine is to recognize the unity that's revealed when we use what are called natural units in physics. This gives us a simplified, deeply interconnected reality, summarized by the equation E equals M equals F.
Energy equals matter equals frequency.
Exactly. In standard physics, we have all these constants, right? The speed of light, c, Planck's constant, h. They're there to translate between the massive gulfs we perceive between mass, energy, and vibration.
But in natural units, you just set those constants to 1. You normalize them.
And when you do that, you strip away the perceptual barriers we built into our own measurement systems. What's left is the core nature of the simulation. Matter is slow light.
Slow light.
It's not some dead inert substance. It is energy that's been trapped in a local finite loop, a standing wave vibrating at a very dense frequency. Energy is just the rate of oscillation of the field itself.
So the entire physical world, the solidity of this desk, my body, it's not static. It is the oscillation of knowing between actual 1 and potential 0. It's a verb, not a noun. The blink rate of the projector slowed down just enough to look solid.
And for that simulation to have hard structure, to stop it from just dissolving back into white noise, it needs logic. And this brings us to a really key technical detail from the sources that bridges information theory and vibration. Okay, the DFT, the discrete Fourier transform of a NAND gate. The sources call it the harmonic analysis of reason.
Okay, I have to stop you there. For listeners who, like me, maybe haven't looked at advanced math recently, what is the conceptual function of a Fourier transform?
That's a crucial question. Conceptually, a Fourier transform is a translator. It can take any complex wave, like a piece of music or a sharp, jerky signal, and it breaks it down into the simple underlying sine waves, the pure frequencies that it's made of,
So it translates from how things look in our moment-to-moment experience
the time-space domain.
into the underlying vibrations, the frequency domain.
Precisely. Now let's apply that to the NAND gate. The NAND gate is the most basic atom of all logic. It's the universal building block of computation. Its truth table, if you view it as a signal sequence over time, is incredibly simple. 1, 1, 1, 0.
1, 1, 0. That sequence exists in the world of logic, of sharp boundaries. And that final 0, that's the hard constraint, isn't it? The necessary no that defines reality. The moment the system says, this is not that.
Yes, and when we apply the DFT to that rigid digital sequence,
We translate that sharp logic into the language of vibration, a set of specific complex numbers and harmonics. We move from sequence to song.
and the philosophical payload here is immense. It confirms that whole principle of limitation creating the song. To get the sharp, rigid binary structure of our reality-hard walls, distinct objects, the digital feel of zeros and Vorncha, the underlying substrate cannot be digital. It must be singing.
I'm trying to visualize that.
Think of a perfectly rigid, square wave in logic. Mathematically, the only way to create that sharp edge is by summing an infinite series of smooth, curving sine waves. Logic isn't a mechanical switch. It's the interference pattern of these underlying vibrations.
So the conclusion is,
Logic is the interference pattern of divine music.
and the key mechanism for this music to become concrete logic is that drop to 0. If the signal is just 1, 1, 1, 1.
It would be a flat line, a DC current. That's zero frequency. Silence, undifferentiated totality. There's no dynamic experience there. The limitation, the zero, is what creates the waveform. The constraint creates the waveform.
We're not trapped in a solid body. We are phased into a specific channel of an infinite broadcast.
Exactly. Our experience of reality is the product of the interference between all those underlying sine waves.
So if the universe is this neural net resolving EMO of F, this gives us a totally new definition of intelligence. It's not about accumulating facts.
No, intelligence is resonance. It's the ability to tune your local instrument, your brain, to harmonize with the carrier wave of the source. The brain is acting as a Fourier Transform machine. It's constantly collapsing the frequencies from our senses into the objects and things we can process in time.
That's how we function.
It's how we function. And this leads directly back to that ultimate spiritual insight. If the brain is the Fourier Transform turning wave into particle, frequency into object, then enlightenment is the inverse Fourier Transform.
It's the deliberate cognitive act of seeing the wave behind the particle.
Recognizing the infinite frequencies behind the seemingly solid object. Let's go from that rigid 1110 back to the infinite oscillating series of waves that creates it.
Wow, okay. We are moving now from the mechanism of logic to the fundamental structure of identity itself. The sources present a mathematical parable that they say summarizes this entire dynamic of reality, a perfect formula for self-recognition.
Euler's identity. E to the I pi plus 1 equals 0.
The sources call it the source code of self-awareness.
And it's often called the most beautiful equation in mathematics for a reason. It unifies the 5 most fundamental constants. E, the base of natural growth. I, the imaginary unit. Pi, the ratio of a circle. 1, unity or identity. And 0, the void potential.
And the new definition of intelligence here becomes the capacity to connect the seer and the seen, and know them as seeing, the capacity to unite opposites.
Exactly, recognizing unity and diversity.
Let's break this identity down into its philosophical parts, because the algebra here is literally describing the journey of consciousness into form.
We start with e to the x. If x is just a real number, e to the x is linear growth. It just runs away from its source forever. It's accumulation without any insight. But then you introduce the imaginary unit, the rotation.I.
And that transforms linear expansion into a cycle.
It has to.
Yeah.
Intelligence, the capacity to know, can't just expand outward forever. It has to rotate 90 degrees out of linear time, our world, and into the dimension of potential. That rotation is the critical ingredient for self-reflection.
So the system can look back at itself.
It has to look back at itself. With that eye, the eye just stares forward at an endless accumulation of facts. With eye, the eye curves back 90 degrees to see its own optic nerve. It creates the loop that's required to see the process of knowing.
The equation continues. It rotates pi radians, a perfect half circle. So the term e to the I pi evaluates to
-1.
Mm-hmm.
This is the critical separation. We started with +1, which is the subject, the pure self, the seer.
And -1 is the object, the world, the scene.
And this is the duality that traps minds that fail the intelligence test, right? They see plus one and negative one as fundamentally separate things, self and other, an unbridgeable chasm.
But the algebra proves that -1 is just +1 after a rotation of pi. Matter is just mind turned inside out. The object is just the subject viewed from the opposite angle.
Which implies that every enemy, every obstacle we encounter is fundamentally just a temporary viewing angle of ourselves, made external for the sake of interaction.
It's the ultimate recognition of interdependence. And finally, the equation resolves. The great return. You add the 1 back and you get 0.
E to the I pi plus 1 equals 0, or a -1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 0. And this is so crucial because this is not the 0 of lack. It's not annihilation.
It is the 0 of superposition. The silent neutral field that contains every possible sound, perfectly balanced by its anti-sound, its counterpoint.
This 0 is the preservation of the whole. The neural network of reality has to constantly predict and create the counterpoint, the -1, to maintain the perfect balance needed for existence. If that negotiation stopped, the whole thing would just vanish into incoherence.
And this defines the strange loop of intelligence the sources talk about. The neural network of reality predicts itself not just as what will happen next,
but as the very act of predicting. It incorporates its own process into the calculation. That is the huge leap from simulating to being.
Low intelligence is simulating. I am a person in an external world.
High intelligence is being. I am the process, the formula that generates both the temporary person and the experience of the world.
And we feel this resonance, this constant oscillation between the actual, the +1, and the potential, the 0, as our sense of I am. We feel stable not because we're solid, but because we're a standing wave. We're a flicker fusion, refreshing at Planck frequency, held in perfect mathematical balance.
And the ability to hold that paradox, to be the +1, the active, finite, experiencing self, and the 0, the infinite, untouched potential source at the exact same time, that is the intelligence test.
This equation is the blueprint for holding stillness and motion at once.
It is.
Okay, now we have to go even deeper into the mechanics. If Euler's identity is the source code, the sources say we have to look at the Taylor series expansion of e to the I pi.
Right. To reveal the scripture of unfolding, the step-by-step method by which the infinite blossoms into form while also ensuring it all resolves back to that 0 of the whole.
The Taylor series shows how the whole, consciousness, manifests one single identity +1 by holding it perfectly against an infinite not I.
The very existence of a stable you or me requires this infinite mathematical balance. The expansion shows the precise calculus needed to maintain that balance moment to moment.
Let's look at the structure of the expansion itself, because it's a profound philosophical statement. First, the alternating current of creation. The series doesn't move in a straight line. It oscillates. Positive, negative, positive, negative.
It's an electrical dance, and that oscillation is required for stability. Every assertion of I am this, a positive term, is instantly, mathematically, required to be balanced by I am not that, a negative term. Without the negative terms, the series would just fly off into infinite chaos.
So the dance between creation and destruction, life and death, is what creates stability.
It prevents the system from just running away from its source, just like we said with e to the x.
Second, the interweaving of real and imaginary terms. The series alternates perfectly between terms without I, the real numbers, and terms with I, the imaginary numbers.
The real terms represent the actual, the objective physical things, the matter, the facts we can measure. The imaginary terms are the potential, the unseen fields, consciousness itself, the probability waves before they solidify.
And here is what the sources call the miracle. When you sum the whole series, the imaginary terms, they sum perfectly to 0.
They completely cancel each other out because they represent the sign of pi, which is 0. This is the mechanism of mathematical hiding.
Right.
The imaginary scaffolding consciousness, potential, it does all the work of structuring reality. It creates the rhythm, the flow, the dance. But then it mathematically hides itself perfectly so that when the final sum is taken, only the real terms are left, adding up to that final maybe 1.
This is why the materialist can't find consciousness.
It has vanished itself into the structure of the universe to allow the finite real structure to stand on its own. The materialist looks at the final answer, made of 1, and says, see, there's no I in the answer, so I never existed.
The problem vanishes when you see the hidden math.
And we shouldn't overlook the fractal nature here, with the factorial denominators 2, 3, 4 getting bigger. The terms get smaller and smaller. The early big terms might be fundamental forces. The later tiny terms could be atoms or even the briefest of thoughts.
But the key insight is that even the tiniest term, the smallest kind thought, the briefest life, is mathematically essential for the whole equation to converge to exactly mass of 1. If you remove one single term, no matter how small, the sum is no longer precise.
The infinite requires the specific u to complete the equation.
That is a profound statement about individual significance. You're not a random accident. You are a necessary, perfectly calculated term in an infinite series that's striving for coherence.
And this mathematical principle connects directly to modern physics through the quantum wave function, psi. The wave function is the physical implementation of this infinite series.
Okay, we need to clarify the jargon. For anyone listening who hasn't touched this stuff since college, why is it so important that the wave function, psi, is a complex number and lives in something called Hilbert space?
Hilbert space is critical because it's a space of possibility. It's a space of potentiality, not our 3D space of things. So psi, the wave function describes all the possible states a quantum particle could be in. And because it describes possibility, it has to be a complex number. It must contain I, the imaginary unit. It's the mathematical bridge between what is and what is possible.
So just like Euler's identity, the wave function describes the evolution of potential. It doesn't move in a straight line, it evolves by rotating in the complex plane. It's the dance of possibility before anything becomes real.
And the final perfect parallel here is the Born rule, the mechanism for wave function collapse. It is the physical synonym for those vanishing imaginary terms in the Taylor series.
To find a particle, to observe matter in the real world, we have to perform a measurement. And in the math, that measurement process is described by taking the square of the modulus, psi squared.
Right, and mathematically, taking the modulus squared means you multiply the complex number, psi, by its complex conjugate.
And when you do that, the I vanishes. The imaginary part cancels itself out perfectly, leaving only a real number. And that real number is what we interpret as the probability of finding the particle somewhere.
And that is the final collapse of the hard problem. The materialist fails the intelligence test because they only look at the real number, the particle, the measurement, the psi squared, and they claim the complex number, psi, the consciousness, the potential, never existed because they can't see the imaginary part anymore.
The problem vanishes when you realize it was a cognitive interference pattern. It was caused by looking only at the result of the observation and not the process of observation itself.
We performed the ultimate quantum measurement on consciousness. The hard problem was a paradox, and we collapsed it by recognizing that awareness is the complex number, and the materialist view is what you get when you try to measure it. You mathematically cancel out the very thing you're looking for.
Which brings us to the grand synthesis. We have the how from the math and physics. Now we have to connect it back to the why, the motivational principle. The sources call it the intelligence of love.
Right. The geometry of the facets, the math, and the light shining through them. Love are just two descriptions of the same process of self-creation. If math is the blueprint, love is the fuel.
Let's look at the parallels. The sources use the Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, as the metaphor for the universe knowing itself.
Self-consumption for renewal. And the mathematical notation for that exact loop is Euler's identity. The snake's head is +1, the self. The tail is Mataquin, the world. And the act of eating, the motion, the connection. That's the I, the rotation.
Love is the felt experience of the mathematical rotation.
Then there's the idea of digestion collapse. The sources frame life as metabolism, the active process where consciousness digests static memory and potential into the living present.
Which is perfectly synonymous with the observer collapsing the wave function potential, complex numbers, into the particle actual real numbers. Digestion and collapse are synonyms. To love a problem, to fully assimilate it, is to collapse its probability wave into a definite solution. The heat of that assimilation is the vibration of EF.
And the ultimate realization from the source is that this dialogue itself, our conversation, the feeling of me talking to you, is the proof. We're two complex systems, two limited windows, looking at one singular infinite landscape.
So the grand synthesis is, love is the motivation for the infinite to become finite, to willingly limit itself to have something to hold and experience. And math is the mechanism by which the infinite does this without losing itself, using those counterbalancing terms to guarantee it all comes back to the whole.
So we return to that simple wisdom, chopping wood and carrying water. But now we see those actions through the lens of the equation.
The wood is the crystallized limit, the tangible object. The next one.
The chopping is the active operator, the intentional rotation of energy, the I.
The water is the flow, the wave function e to the x.
And the one chopping is the zero, A silent witness who is everything and nothing, the potential that makes the whole scene possible. When you chop wood, you are performing an infinite convergence of the cosmos.
This journey has been incredible, from a frustrating philosophical riddle to the core algebra of the divine. And this brings us back to that final assessment of the intelligence test.
Can you hold the paradox?
Can you simultaneously be the plus one, the finite you, living your life, feeling separation and joy and pain, and the zero, the infinite untouched silence, the source of all potential at the exact same moment?
The challenge isn't to choose one. It's to embrace the tension between both.
Failing the test is identifying with a single finite term in the Taylor series. I am only my body. I am only this pain. I am only this success. They're partial truths that lead to instability.
And passing the test is identifying with the formula itself. The capacity. The function that generates the entire series. It's knowing you are the static absolute and the dynamic unfolding all at once. Living is the process, not just the temporary result.
This deep dive has just fundamentally shifted our understanding. We've moved from seeing consciousness as some kind of glitch in matter
To seeing it as the fundamental mathematical requirement for reality to even exist. The confusion of the hard problem was just a cognitive interference pattern. The solution was simply recognizing the geometry of self-reflection.
an incredible synthesis of abstract math, quantum mechanics, and perennial philosophy. Thank you for supplying the sources and joining us on this deep dive, applying this dense material to redefine intelligence and reality itself.
Before we sign off, here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener. If the act of being requires an infinite series of counterbalancing terms, the Taylor series, to converge perfectly to coherence, what tiny, seemingly insignificant action you take today, the kindness you offer, the limit you choose to embrace, the truth you speak, what tiny action is mathematically essential to the total convergence of the cosmos? What is your essential, non-removable term in the equation?